The smell of roast beef wafted through the air, but it only made my stomach churn. I gripped the edge of the mahogany dining table, trying to steady myself as another wave of nausea hit. Jack, my husband, sat beside me, oblivious to my discomfort as he chatted with his father about the latest football game. "Emily, dear, aren't you going to eat?" Linda's shrill voice cut through the din. My mother-in-law's piercing gaze bore into me from across the table. I spent hours preparing this meal. I forced a weak smile. "It looks delicious, Linda. I'm just not feeling well." Linda's eyes narrowed. "Morning sickness again? Honestly, Emily, you're barely showing. I worked full-time when I was pregnant with Jack, and I never complained once." I bit my tongue, fighting back the urge to remind her that every pregnancy was different. Instead, I reached for my water glass, hoping the cool liquid would settle my stomach. Jack finally seemed to notice my distress. He placed a hand on my arm, but his touch felt more perfunctory than comforting. "You okay, hon?" Before I could answer, Linda interjected, "Oh, she's fine, Jack. Just being dramatic as usual." I clenched my jaw, willing myself not to cry. How had it come to this? When Jack and I first got married, he was my rock, my protector. Now he sat silently as his mother belittled me week after week. "So, Emily," Howard, my father-in-law, spoke up, his kind eyes meeting mine. "How's work going? Still enjoying that new project?" Grateful for the change of subject, I launched into a description of my latest marketing campaign. As I spoke, I felt some of the tension leave my body. At least someone at this table seemed genuinely interested in my life. Halfway through my explanation, Linda interrupted. "That's all very nice, dear, but don't you think it's time you started focusing on preparing for the baby? You can't possibly plan to keep working once the little one arrives." I froze, my words dying in my throat. Jack shifted uncomfortably beside me, but remained silent. "Actually," I said, finding my voice, "I do plan to return to work after my maternity leave. Jack and I discussed it, and we both agree it's the best decision for our family." Linda's face turned an alarming shade of red. "Jack, you can't possibly agree with this nonsense. A child needs its mother at home." I turned to my husband, silently pleading for his support. He cleared his throat, avoiding my gaze. "Well, Mom, times have changed. Lots of women work these days." It wasn't exactly a ringing endorsement, but it was something. I squeezed Jack's hand under the table, hoping to convey my gratitude. Linda, however, wasn't finished. "I see, so you're planning to let strangers raise your child while you gallivant off to the office? How selfish can you be, Emily?" The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the table harder, my knuckles turning white. "Excuse me," I mumbled, pushing back my chair. "I need some air." As I stood, a sharp pain ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, doubling over. "Emily?" Jack's voice sounded far away. "What's wrong?" I tried to answer, but another wave of pain hit, stealing my breath. The last thing I heard before the world went black was Linda's exasperated sigh. "Oh, for heaven's sake, now she's fainting? Really, Emily, this is getting ridiculous." Then everything faded to darkness, and I crumpled to the floor. I woke up in a hospital bed, the sterile smell of disinfectant filling my nostrils. Jack sat in a chair beside me, his head in his hands. When he looked up, I saw the worry etched on his face, a glimpse of the man I fell in love with years ago. "Emily, thank God you're awake," he said, reaching for my hand. "The doctor said you were severely dehydrated. Why didn't you tell me how bad it was?" I almost laughed. "I've been trying to tell you for weeks, Jack. You just haven't been listening." His face fell, and for a moment I saw guilt flash in his eyes. But then he straightened, his jaw set. "Mom said you were just being dramatic. I didn't think." "You didn't think," I cut him off, my voice sharp. "That's the problem, Jack. You never think when it comes to your mother." As if summoned by her name, Linda burst into the room, Howard trailing behind her. "Oh, Emily," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with false concern. "We were so worried. How could you let yourself get into such a state?" I closed my eyes, willing myself to stay calm. When I opened them, I locked gazes with Howard, silently pleading for help. He cleared his throat. "Linda, maybe we should give Emily some space to rest." "Nonsense," Linda snapped. "She's had plenty of rest. Now, Emily, dear, when can we expect you back at our weekly dinners? You know how important family time is." I felt something snap inside me. All the frustration, all the hurt of the past few months came bubbling to the surface. "Family time?" I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. Is that what you call it when you spend every Sunday belittling me and undermining my decisions? The room fell silent. Jack shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Linda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "Now, Emily," Jack started, but I cut him off with a glare. "No, Jack. I'm done pretending everything's okay." I turned back to Linda. "From the moment Jack and I started dating, you've made it clear you don't think I'm good enough for your precious son. Well, guess what? I'm not going anywhere. This baby is coming, whether you like it or not, and I won't let you poison our child with your toxic behavior." Linda's face turned an alarming shade of red. "How dare you speak to me like that? Jack, are you going to let her talk to your mother this way?" All eyes turned to Jack. I held my breath, a part of me still hoping he'd stand up for me, like he used to in the early days of our relationship. But Jack just sat there, looking lost. I don't know what to say," he mumbled. In that moment, I saw our entire relationship flash before my eyes. Our first meeting at a speed dating event, where Jack's kind smile had stood out in a sea of forgettable faces. Our whirlwind courtship filled with laughter and dreams of the future. The gradual change after our wedding as Linda's influence grew and Jack became more distant. "I think," Howard said quietly, breaking the tense silence, "that we should all take a step back and give Emily the rest she needs." Linda opened her mouth to protest, but Howard silenced her with a look I'd never seen him use before. As they left the room, I caught Howard's eye. He gave me a small, sad smile that spoke volumes. Left alone with Jack, I felt a weariness settle over me that had nothing to do with my physical condition. "Emily," Jack started, his voice hesitant. "I'm sorry. I know things haven't been easy lately." I looked at him, really looked at him, and wondered when we'd become such strangers. "Sorry isn't enough anymore, Jack," I said softly. "Something has to change." As the words left my mouth, I felt the baby kick, as if in agreement. I placed a hand on my swollen belly, a fierce protectiveness washing over me. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. I would do whatever it took to protect my child from the toxic environment I'd endured for far too long. The bathroom floor was cold against my cheek as I hugged the toilet bowl, heaving for the third time that morning. 6 months into my pregnancy, and the morning sickness showed no signs of letting up. I heard Jack's footsteps in the hallway and braced myself for another round of his half-hearted concern. "Emily, you okay in there?" His voice was muffled through the door. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. "Just peachy," I croaked. The door creaked open, and Jack poked his head in. "Listen, I know you're not feeling great, but Mom's expecting us for dinner tonight. She's making her famous pot roast." I stared at him in disbelief. "Jack, I can barely keep water down. How am I supposed to sit through another dinner?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Can't you just try? For me?" The plea in his voice made something snap inside me. I struggled to my feet, ignoring the way the room spun. "For you? When was the last time you did something for me, Jack?" His face hardened. "That's not fair. I've been working extra hours to prepare for the baby. And I've been growing a human being while your mother treats me like an incubator." I shot back. Jack's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it. "It's Mom. She wants to know if we're bringing dessert." I threw my hands up in exasperation. "Unbelievable. You know what? Go to your precious dinner. I'll stay here and try not to die of dehydration." His eyes widened. "You can't be serious. Mom will be devastated if you don't show up." "Oh, I'm dead serious," I said, brushing past him into the bedroom. "In fact, I think I'm done with these weekly torture sessions altogether." Jack followed me, his voice rising. "Emily, you can't just decide that on your own. We're a family." I whirled to face him. "Are we? Because lately, it feels like I'm just an afterthought in your perfect mother-son dynamic." He flinched as if I'd slapped him. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the old Jack, the one who used to stand up for me, who put our relationship first. But then his jaw set, and I knew what was coming. "Fine," he said coldly. "I'll tell Mom you're not feeling well. Again." As he stormed out, I sank onto the bed, one hand resting on my swollen belly. "Don't worry, little one," I whispered. "Mommy's going to figure this out." Hours later, I was jolted awake by the sound of the front door slamming. Jack's heavy footsteps approached the bedroom, and I steeled myself for another argument. But when he entered, the anger on his face was mixed with something else. Worry? "Emily," he said, his voice strained. "Mom thinks..." She thinks maybe you're faking how sick you are, to avoid her. I sat up slowly, my head spinning. Excuse me? Jack ran a hand through his hair. She says her friend's daughter had an easy pregnancy and that you're just being dramatic, and she thinks maybe you're not cut out for motherhood if you can't handle this. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I'd known Linda didn't like me, but this was a new low. And what do you think, Jack? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He wouldn't meet my eyes. I don't know what to think anymore. In that moment, something crystallized inside me. I thought of all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, all the times I'd bitten my tongue to keep the peace. I thought of the baby growing inside me, innocent and unaware of the storm brewing around it. I think, I said slowly, that it's time I started putting myself and our child first. Jack's head snapped up. What does that mean? I met his gaze steadily. It means I'm done compromising my health and happiness for people who clearly don't value either. Your mother and you, Jack. You've made your priorities clear. Now it's time I made mine clear, too. As the words left my mouth, I felt a weight from my shoulders. Whatever came next, I knew I was making the right choice, for myself and for my baby. I stood in Linda's kitchen, my hands shaking as I chopped vegetables for yet another family dinner. At 8 months pregnant, my body ached, and waves of nausea still plagued me. But here I was, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law because Jack had begged me to give his mother one more chance. Emily, dear, Linda's saccharine voice grated on my nerves. Don't forget to dice those carrots finely. You know how Jack likes them. I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to throw the knife across the room. Of course, Linda, I managed to say. Jack and Howard's voices drifted in from the living room, discussing some football game. I longed to be anywhere but here, trapped in this suffocating house with people who seemed oblivious to my discomfort. Suddenly, a sharp pain ripped through my abdomen. I gasped, dropping the knife with a clatter. Linda whirled around, her eyes narrowing. Oh, for heaven's sake, Emily, don't be so dramatic. It's just a little kitchen work. I clutched the counter, trying to steady myself. Linda, I think something's wrong. She rolled her eyes. Nonsense, you're barely 8 months along. Stop trying to get out of cooking dinner. Another wave of pain hit, more intense than the first. I felt a warm gush between my legs and looked down in horror to see a puddle forming at my feet. My water broke, I whispered, panic rising in my throat. Linda's face contorted with disbelief and annoyance. Impossible. You're faking this, aren't you, just to avoid your responsibilities? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Even now, faced with irrefutable evidence, she was accusing me of lying. Jack! I called out, my voice strained. Jack, please! He appeared in the doorway, looking confused. What's going on? Your wife is putting on quite a performance, Linda said, her voice dripping with disdain. Anything to get out of family dinner, it seems. I stared at Jack, silently pleading with him to see the truth. But his eyes darted between me and his mother, uncertainty written all over his face. Jack, I gasped, another contraction hitting. The baby's coming. We need to go to the hospital. Now. He hesitated, and in that moment I saw our entire future crumble. How could he doubt me at a time like this? Son? Howard's voice cut through the tension as he entered the kitchen. Your wife needs you. Let's get her to the hospital. Thank God for Howard. He was already grabbing my hospital bag and car keys while Jack still stood frozen. This is ridiculous, Linda huffed. She's clearly faking. Jack, don't let her manipulate you like this. I watched as Jack's face hardened and he turned to his mother. Mom, I'm sure Emily wouldn't, but I didn't hear the rest. A contraction so powerful it brought me to my knees, cut off all other sensations. Through the haze of pain, I heard Howard's urgent voice calling 911. As I knelt on Linda's pristine kitchen floor, amniotic fluid pooling around me, I made a decision. No matter what happened next, I would never again put myself in a position where my well-being, and now my child's, came second to anyone else's comfort or convenience. Emily, Howard's gentle voice broke through my thoughts. The ambulance is on its way. Just breathe, okay? I nodded, grateful for his calm presence. Jack knelt beside me, finally snapping out of his daze. Em, I'm so sorry. I should have. Not now, Jack. I cut him off, another contraction building. We'll talk about this later. As the sound of sirens approached, I locked eyes with Linda, who still stood watching with a mixture of disbelief and annoyance. In that moment, I silently vowed that this would be the last time I ever set foot in her house. The paramedics burst in, and as they lifted me onto the stretcher, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for certain. My baby and I deserved better than this. And I was finally ready to fight for it. The hospital room was a blur of beeping machines and urgent voices. I gripped the sides of the bed, pain tearing through me as another contraction hit. Howard stood by my side, his steady presence a stark contrast to Jack's nervous pacing. "Where's the doctor?" Jack demanded, his voice tinged with panic. "She's not supposed to be this early." I wanted to scream at him to remind him that I'd been telling him for weeks something wasn't right, but another wave of pain stole my breath, leaving me gasping. "Jack," Howard said firmly, "why don't you go check on the doctor? I'll stay with Emily." As Jack rushed out, Howard took my hand. "You're doing great, Emily. Just breathe." I nodded gratefully, squeezing his hand as another contraction built. "Howard," I managed between breaths, "thank you for believing me, for helping." His eyes softened with a mix of kindness and regret. "I'm sorry I didn't step in sooner. I should have seen how Linda and Jack were treating you." Before I could respond, the door burst open. Linda swept in, her face a mask of indignation. "Emily, how could you do this to us? You've ruined our family dinner." I stared at her in disbelief. Even now, with me in labor, all she cared about was her precious dinner? Howard's face hardened. "Linda, that's enough. Emily needs calm and support right now." Linda opened her mouth to argue, but just then, Jack returned with the doctor. The next few hours passed in a haze of pain, fear, and determination. Through it all, I was acutely aware of Jack's hesitation, how he looked to his mother for guidance instead of focusing on me. Finally, with one last push, our daughter entered the world. The sound of her first cry filled the room, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The doctor placed her on my chest, and I felt a love so fierce it took my breath away. "Hello, Lily," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I'm your mom." As the nurses took Lily to clean her up, I became aware of the tension in the room. Linda stood in the corner, her lips pursed in disapproval. Jack hovered uncertainly between us, looking lost. "Well," Linda said, breaking the silence, "I suppose we should be grateful she's healthy, even if she is premature. Really, Emily, couldn't you have held on for a few more weeks?" I felt something snap inside me. All the hurt, frustration, and anger I'd been holding back for months came rushing to the surface. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. Linda blinked, taken aback. "Excuse me?" I said, "Get out," I repeated, louder this time. "I want you out of this room, out of my life, and out of my daughter's life." Jack stepped forward, his face pale. "Emily, you don't mean that. She's Lily's grandmother." I turned to him, seeing him clearly for the first time in months. "And what kind of father are you going to be, Jack? Will you stand by and let her treat our daughter the way she's treated me?" He flinched, guilt flashing across his face. But before he could respond, Howard spoke up. "I think it's best if we give Emily some space. Linda, Jack, let's go." As they filed out, Howard paused at the door. "Emily, if you need anything at all, I'm here." I nodded, grateful for his support. As the door closed behind them, I was left alone with my thoughts and the soft sounds of Lily's breathing from the nearby bassinet. In that quiet moment, holding my newborn daughter and reflecting on the events that led us here, I made a decision. No matter what it took, I would protect Lily from the toxic environment I'd endured, even if it meant walking away from my marriage, from the life I thought I wanted. I looked down at Lily's peaceful face, feeling a surge of strength and determination. "It's you and me now, little one," I whispered, "and I promise I'll always put you first." The front door creaked open as Jack helped me inside, Lily nestled in my arms. After a week in the hospital, I was exhausted but determined. The house felt different now, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. "Emily, dear," Linda's shrill voice pierced the air. She bustled into the hallway, arms outstretched. "Let me see my granddaughter." I instinctively tightened my hold on Lily. "Not now, Linda. We're tired and need to rest." Linda's face fell, but she quickly plastered on a smile. Of course. I've prepared a wonderful welcome-home dinner. Jack, why don't you take the baby while Emily freshens up?" Before I could protest, Jack reached for Lily. Come on, Em. Mom's just trying to help. I felt a surge of panic as Jack took our daughter. Jack, please, I'd rather keep her with me. Linda tutted. Emily, you can't be so possessive, it's not healthy. I bit my tongue, too tired to argue. As I watched Jack carry Lily into the living room, following his mother like an obedient puppy, something inside me hardened. In our bedroom, I found a stack of parenting books on the nightstand, all chosen by Linda, no doubt. Atop the pile sat a handwritten note. Emily, I hope these help you become a better mother. Love, Linda. My hands shook as I crumpled the note. How dare she? After everything that had happened, she still thought she knew best. I heard Lily's cry from downstairs, followed by Linda's voice. Oh, Jack, let me show you how to hold her properly. Emily clearly hasn't figured it out yet. That was the last straw. I marched downstairs, my exhaustion replaced by a fierce determination. In the living room, I found Linda cradling Lily while Jack hovered nervously. Give me my daughter, I said, my voice low and dangerous. Linda looked up, surprise flashing across her face. Emily, don't be silly. I'm just showing Jack. Now. I held out my arms, leaving no room for argument. Jack stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Em, what's gotten into you? Mom's just trying to help. I turned to him, really seeing him for the first time since Lily's birth. Is she, Jack? Or is she trying to control our family, just like she's controlled you all these years? The room fell silent, save for Lily's soft whimpers. Linda's face hardened as she reluctantly handed me the baby. I think, I said, cradling Lily close, that it's time we had a serious talk about boundaries. Jack's eyes widened. Emily, please. Can't we just enjoy being home? I shook my head, feeling a strange calm settle over me. No, Jack. We can't keep pretending everything's okay. It's not just about me anymore. It's about Lily. Linda huffed. This is ridiculous. Jack, tell your wife she's being unreasonable. But as Jack opened his mouth to speak, I cut him off. Actually, I have something to say first. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. I can't do this anymore. The constant criticism, the lack of support, the way you both dismiss my feelings and needs. It stops now. Jack paled. What are you saying? I met his gaze steadily. I'm saying that unless things change dramatically, and I mean real, lasting change, I'm leaving, and I'm taking Lily with me. The silence that followed was deafening. Linda's face contorted with rage, while Jack looked like he'd been slapped. You can't do that, Linda sputtered. Jack, tell her she can't do that. But Jack just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders as I spoke the words I'd been holding back for so long. I can, and I will. I love you, Jack, but I love our daughter more, and I won't let her grow up in this toxic environment. As I turned to head back upstairs, Lily snuggled against my chest I heard Linda's indignant squawks and Jack's stammered protests. But for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace with my decision. Whatever came next, I knew I was doing the right thing, for myself and for Lily. The tension in the house was unbearable. It had been 3 days since I'd threatened to leave, and Jack had been walking on eggshells around me. Linda, on the other hand, had doubled down on her efforts to control everything. I was in the nursery, rocking Lily to sleep when I heard raised voices from downstairs. Curious, I gently placed Lily in her crib and crept to the top of the stairs. This is all your fault, Jack. Linda's shrill voice carried up the stairwell. If you just put your foot down with that woman... That woman is my wife, Mom, Jack interrupted, his voice uncharacteristically firm. And Lily's mother. I held my breath, hardly daring to hope that Jack was finally standing up to Linda. Oh, please, Linda scoffed. She's manipulating you. Can't you see that? First with this ridiculous pregnancy, and now threatening to take your child away. My blood boiled at her words. How dare she dismiss everything I'd been through? Actually, a new voice joined the fray, Howard's. I think Emily's been more than patient with both of you. I inched down a few steps, straining to hear better. Howard, Linda gasped. How can you say that? We've done nothing but try to help. Help? Howard's voice was thick with disgust. Is that what you call constantly criticizing and belittling our daughter-in-law, dismissing her health concerns, trying to take over raising our granddaughter? There was a moment of stunned silence before Linda sputtered. I was just trying to guide them. They're so young. They don't know what they're doing. They're adults, Linda, Howard said firmly. Capable adults who don't need you micromanaging their lives. I heard footsteps and then Howard's voice again, closer this time. Jack, son, I owe you an apology. I should have stepped in sooner, should have seen how your mother's behavior was affecting your marriage. Dad, Jack started, but Howard cut him off. No, let me finish. I've stood by for too long watching your mother steamroll over everyone's feelings. Well, not anymore. There was a rustling of paper, and then Linda's shocked gasp. Howard, what is this? Divorce papers, Linda, Howard said calmly. I can't be part of this toxic dynamic anymore, and if you have any hope of salvaging your relationship with your son and granddaughter, I suggest you take a long, hard look at your behavior. My heart raced as I processed what I'd just heard. Howard was leaving Linda, and he was on my side. Suddenly, a piercing wail cut through the tension. Lily had woken up. I rushed back to the nursery, scooping her into my arms just as I heard footsteps on the stairs. Jack appeared in the doorway, his face a mix of emotions. Em, he said softly. Can we talk? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He crossed the room, gently touching Lily's cheek before meeting my eyes. I heard everything, I whispered. Jack's shoulders sagged. I'm so sorry, Emily, for everything. I've been a coward, letting my mother run our lives, but I don't want to lose you or Lily. I wanted to believe him, but after months of disappointment, I hesitated. Jack, But before I could finish, Linda burst into the room, her face red with fury. This is all your fault, she shrieked, pointing at me. You've turned my family against me. Jack stepped between us, shielding Lily and me. That's enough, Mom. You need to leave, now. Linda's eyes widened in disbelief. Jack! You can't mean that. I do, he said firmly. Emily and Lily are my family now, and if you can't respect that, you have no place in our lives. As Linda stormed out, sobbing dramatically, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for us after all. But as I looked down at Lily, peaceful in my arms, I knew the hardest decision was still to come. Could I trust Jack to maintain this newfound backbone? Or was it time to make a clean break and start a new life with my daughter? With my heart pounding and Lily's warm weight in my arms, I realized the moment of truth had arrived. Whatever I decided next would shape not just my future but Lily's as well. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming, but I knew I had to be strong, for both of us. 6 months had passed since that fateful night when everything changed. I sat on a park bench, watching Lily toddle across the grass, her chubby legs still unsteady but her determination unwavering. Just like her mother, I thought with a smile. She's getting so big, a familiar voice said. I looked up to see Howard approaching, a wistful smile on his face. She is, I agreed, patting the bench beside me. How are you doing, Howard? He sighed as he sat down. The divorce is final. Linda, well, she's not taking it well, but I don't regret my decision. I nodded, understanding all too well. My own divorce from Jack had been finalized just a month ago. It hadn't been easy, but I knew it was the right choice for Lily and me. Have you heard from Jack? Howard asked hesitantly. I shook my head. Not since the court hearing. I think he's still trying to figure things out. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text. It was Jack, asking if he could see Lily this weekend. I showed Howard the message, my heart conflicted. What are you going to do? He asked gently. I watched Lily laugh as she chased a butterfly, her joy infectious. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to protect her from everything, but she deserves to know her father. Howard nodded thoughtfully. You know, Emily, I've been thinking a lot about the mistakes I made, staying silent when I should have spoken up, letting Linda's behavior go unchecked for so long. I don't want to make those same mistakes with Lily. I turned to him, surprised. What do you mean? I mean, he said, his eyes misty, that I want to be there for both of you. Not to replace Jack, but to support you however I can, if you'll let me. Tears welled up in my eyes as I reached out to squeeze his hand. Howard, you've already done so much. Your support these past months has meant everything. Just then Lily toddled over, holding out a dandelion. Mama, she exclaimed proudly. I scooped her up, inhaling her sweet baby scent. Thank you, sweetheart. It's beautiful. As Lily snuggled into my lap, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I knew we'd be okay. You know, I said to Howard, I think I will let Jack see Lily this weekend, but on my terms. No Linda, and only for a few hours. Howard nodded approvingly. That sounds fair, and if you need backup, I'm just a phone call away. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, I reflected on how much had changed. The Emily of a year ago would never have believed she'd be here, a single mother, divorced, but stronger and happier than ever. "Come on, little one," I said, standing up with Lily in my arms. "Let's go home." Howard walked us to my car, helping me buckle Lily into her seat. Before I got in, he pulled me into a warm hug. "I'm proud of you, Emily," he said softly. "You're an amazing mother, and Lily is lucky to have you." As I drove home, Lily babbling happily in the back seat, I felt a surge of gratitude. For my parents, who had welcomed us with open arms. For Howard, who had become the father figure I never knew I needed. And even for Jack and Linda, whose actions had ultimately led me to find my own strength. But most of all, I was grateful for Lily, my beautiful, resilient daughter who had given me the courage to stand up for myself and create the life we deserved. As we pulled into our driveway, our new home, free from the shadows of the past, I made a silent promise to Lily and myself. We would face whatever challenges came our way together, with love, strength, and the unwavering belief that we deserved happiness. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what it held. As I unbuckled Lily from her car seat, her tiny arms wrapping around my neck, I knew that this moment, this love was all that truly mattered. We were survivors, Lily and I, and together we would thrive. I never imagined my world would start to crumble while standing in the warmth of our small, cozy kitchen. Derek, my husband of 7 years, was talking on the phone, his back turned to me, oblivious to my presence. My mother had just been diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the weight of that reality was crushing me. But Derek seemed more concerned with something else entirely. "Yeah, she's an only child," Derek said, his voice carrying a mix of curiosity and greed I'd never noticed before. "Do you think the insurance will be a big payout?" Right. Make sure to look into it." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. Was he really discussing my mother's life insurance at a time like this? As he hung up, he turned and finally noticed me. "Oh, Lillian, didn't see you there. Was just talking to a buddy about some work stuff." "Work stuff?" I echoed, my voice hollow. The lie was blatant, and a pit formed in my stomach. "Yeah, just regular things. How's your mom?" he asked, but the question felt obligatory, devoid of genuine concern. "She's struggling," I admitted, fighting the lump in my throat. "Derek, were you really talking about her insurance?" He paused, then shrugged, an unsettling smile playing on his lips. "Well, yeah, it's practical to think about these things, right? I mean, it's sad, but we gotta be prepared." Prepared? For what? My mother's death was a ticking clock, and here he was, counting the potential inheritance. I wanted to scream, to cry, to make him see the monstrous nature of his thoughts. But I stood frozen, disbelief chaining my words. "It's not just about the money, Derek." "She's my mother," I said, barely a whisper. Of course," he replied too quickly, his eyes not meeting mine. "But life goes on, Lillian. We need to think about the future." His words felt like a betrayal, a stark revelation of the man I had married. Was this always who he was? A cold, calculating stranger? I turned away, the room suddenly feeling too small, his presence too suffocating. "I need some air," I managed to choke out before stepping outside, leaving Derek and his twisted priorities behind. The evening air did little to soothe the turmoil inside me. My mother's gentle smile, her warmth, the way she always knew how to make everything all right, flashed through my mind. And juxtaposed with that was Derek, discussing her death like a business transaction. I couldn't reconcile the two images, and as the night grew darker, so did the realization that the man I shared my life with was a stranger who saw my mother's impending death as nothing more than an opportunity for financial gain. Tears blurred my vision, not just for my mother's fate, but for the loss of the man I thought I knew. In that moment, a resolve began to form. Derek's callousness had opened my eyes to the truth, and I knew I couldn't let this go. I had to protect my mother's legacy from the man who saw her life in dollar signs. And I would start by uncovering every lie, every deceitful plan he harbored. It was time for Derek to see that I was not the naive, compliant wife he took me for. As I walked back inside, the path forward was clear. It would be difficult, painful even, but I was determined. Derek had awakened a strength in me I never knew I had, and for my mother's sake, I would fight back. The next day I visited my mother, the hospital's sterile smell and the quiet hum of machines surrounding us. She was weak but managed to smile when she saw me. We talked about everything except her illness and the looming shadow it cast over our lives. It was a temporary escape, a moment of normalcy in the chaos. Returning home, the atmosphere shifted the moment I stepped through the door. Derek was on the phone again, his voice hushed but intense. He didn't notice my arrival, too engrossed in his conversation. No, we can't rush this. It's a delicate situation, he whispered, pacing the living room. Yeah, once the insurance comes through, we'll be set. Just need to play it cool for now. My heart sank. There it was again, his obsession with the insurance money. Anger bubbled inside me, a stark contrast to the sadness I felt just moments ago. I cleared my throat, and Derek jumped, his guilty gaze meeting mine. Lillian, you're back early. Ignoring his feigned surprise, I confronted him. Who were you talking to about playing it cool, and what insurance are you waiting for? He hesitated, then laughed it off. Babe, you're overthinking it. Just work stuff. You know how it is. Work stuff, I repeated, the lie tasting bitter. Derek, why are you so interested in my mother's insurance? Shouldn't we be focusing on her, on spending time with her, instead of whatever this is? He scoffed, his demeanor changing. Lillian, be realistic. Your mom's not going to get better. We need to think about the future, our future. I stared at him, disbelief and disgust mingling. My mother is dying, Derek, and all you can think about is money? He rolled his eyes, frustration evident. You're being too emotional. It's not just about the money. It's about security, our security. Security? By capitalizing on my mother's death? I shot back, my voice rising. Derek approached, his expression hardening. Listen, Lillian, you might not like it, but that's how the world works. We need to look out for ourselves. If you're too blinded by your emotions to see that, then I don't know what to tell you. His words were like a slap in the face, revealing the depth of his selfishness. It was clear Derek had no empathy, no love for anything beyond his own desires. That's how you see it, huh? I said, my voice cold. Well, I see a man so consumed by greed he can't even pretend to care about his dying mother-in-law, or his wife. Derek sneered. Maybe if you weren't so naive, you'd understand. But go ahead, keep living in your little fantasy world where everything's fine. The conversation was going nowhere, and I realized arguing with Derek was useless. He was lost, consumed by his own greed. But I wasn't going to let him drag me down with him. Turning on my heel, I left him standing there, his words echoing in the now empty room. I needed a plan, a way to protect my mother's legacy and ensure Derek wouldn't get a penny of it. As I headed to my room, the pieces of a plan began to form in my mind. Derek wanted a battle? He'd get one. But unlike him, I'd be fighting for something far more important than money. Over the next few days, I watched Derek like a hawk, noting every phone call, every sneaky glance he thought I didn't catch. His obsession with the insurance money grew more apparent, and so did his negligence towards anything that didn't serve his agenda. One evening, as we sat across from each other at dinner, the silence between us was palpable. Derek broke it, his voice dripping with faux concern. So did you talk to your mom about the insurance? I paused, fork midair, staring at him incredulously. You're really going to bring this up now? At dinner? He shrugged, unabashed. It's an important conversation, Lillian. We need to know where we stand financially. I set my fork down, my appetite gone. My mother is dying, Derek, and all you can think about is money. It's disgusting. He leaned forward, a cold glint in his eyes. It's not disgusting, Lillian. It's practical. Your mother wouldn't want you to be left struggling. I scoffed. You don't know the first thing about what my mother wants. The conversation spiraled into yet another argument, Derek's greed clashing with my disgust. It was clear we were on two different paths, his paved with gold, mine with the desire to do right by my mother. After dinner, I retreated to my room, a plan forming in my mind. It was time to take action, to ensure Derek's schemes would fall flat. I started researching, digging into legal documents, insurance policies, and anything else that could help me protect my mother's interests. The next morning, I made a call to a family lawyer, explaining my situation and seeking advice on how to safeguard my mother's assets from Derek's clutches. The lawyer was sympathetic, offering guidance on how to proceed. Armed with this new knowledge, I confronted Derek again. This time, I was prepared. "Derek, I've spoken to a lawyer," I announced as I entered the living room where he was lounging, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "A lawyer? Why?" "To ensure my mother's wishes are respected and her assets are protected from anyone who might have ulterior motives." Derek laughed, but there was an edge to it. "You're being dramatic, Lillian. What, you think I'm some kind of villain?" "No, not dramatic, just cautious," I replied, meeting his gaze squarely. "I'm making sure that my mother's legacy is used as she intended, not as a payday for someone else's greed." The conversation escalated quickly, Derek's anger flaring as he realized I was serious about blocking his access to the insurance money. "You can't do this, Lillian. We're married. What's yours is mine," he spat, his composure slipping. "Not anymore," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm filing for separation, Derek. I won't let you exploit my mother's death for your own gain." The revelation hit Derek like a ton of bricks. His anger turned to panic as he realized his plans were crumbling. "Lillian, you don't mean that. We can work this out," he pleaded, his arrogance replaced by desperation. But it was too late. I had seen the true extent of his greed, and there was no going back. "I do mean it, Derek. It's over." I left him standing there, his future plans shattering around him. It was a decisive moment, one that marked the beginning of my journey to ensure justice for my mother and a future free from Derek's destructive greed. The days following my declaration of separation were filled with tension. Derek oscillated between trying to sweet-talk me into changing my mind and expressing his outrage over my actions. However, I remained firm, bolstered by the support of my lawyer and the clarity of my mission. One evening, as I was organizing documents related to my mother's care, Derek stormed into the room, his face a mask of anger and desperation. "You can't do this to me, Lillian. You can't just cut me off and expect me to accept it," he bellowed, his fists clenched at his sides. I looked up from the papers, meeting his gaze with a calm I didn't feel. "I can, and I am. You've made it abundantly clear where your priorities lie, Derek. It's not with me, and it's certainly not with my mother." He paced back and forth, a caged animal. "You're being selfish. You're thinking only about yourself and your mother. What about us? What about what I need?" "Us," I echoed, incredulous. "There is no us, not when you see my mother's death as a financial opportunity. You've shown me who you truly are, Derek." He stopped pacing, looking at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Lillian, please. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. We can fix this. We can go to counseling, talk it out." The plea was almost laughable. "Talk it out?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "There's nothing to talk out, Derek. Your actions and words have spoken louder than any therapy session ever could." Derek's face hardened, the brief flash of desperation giving way to cold fury. "You'll regret this, Lillian. If you think you can just divorce me and walk away with everything, you're mistaken. I'll fight you on this. I'll make sure you get nothing." His threat hung in the air between us, heavy and ominous. But instead of fear, I felt a surge of resolve. "You can try, Derek, but you'll find that I'm not as easy to bully or manipulate as you think. I'm fighting for what's right, for my mother's dignity and her wishes. You're fighting for greed. We'll see who comes out on top." Derek glared at me, his jaw working as if he wanted to say more. But instead, he stormed out of the room, leaving me alone with my documents and my determination. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and meetings with my lawyer. Derek tried to contest the separation, to lay claim to assets and money that he believed he was entitled to. But with each attempt, he found himself blocked by the legal safeguards I had put in place, his greed and malice turning to frustration and defeat. As the day of the court hearing approached, I prepared myself for the final confrontation. Derek had become more erratic, his threats more desperate, but I refused to be intimidated. I had truth and justice on my side, and I was ready to fight for them, no matter what Derek threw my way. The courthouse was imposing, its stone walls and solemn atmosphere a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within me. Derek was already there, his posture rigid, a mask of defiance plastered on his face. I avoided his gaze, focusing instead on the strength I had garnered over the past weeks. When our case was called, we stood before the judge, a no-nonsense woman with a keen eye. She reviewed the documents, her gaze shifting between us, piercing and calculating. "Mr. and Mrs. Turner, this is a matter of division of assets and the finalization of your separation. Mrs. Turner, you've made allegations regarding Mr. Turner's intentions towards your mother's estate. How do you wish to proceed?" Before I could speak, Derek interjected, "Your Honor, this is all a misunderstanding. I've always had Lillian's and her mother's best interests at heart." His words were like venom, smooth and deadly. I clenched my fists, feeling my lawyer's reassuring glance. "Your Honor, if I may," my lawyer began, standing to address the court. "We have documented evidence of Mr. Don Turner's attempts to manipulate Mrs. Turner into securing a significant portion of her mother's estate for his own gain. His interest in their assets spiked notably upon the diagnosis of Mrs. Turner's mother's illness." The judge nodded, indicating for my lawyer to continue. As evidence was presented, Derek's facade began to crumble, his discomfort visible to all in the courtroom. "And so," my lawyer concluded, "we request that the court recognize Mrs. Mia Turner's sole right to her mother's estate and enforce a fair division of their shared assets, free from Mr. Turner's coercion." The courtroom fell silent as the judge considered the evidence before her. Derek's lawyer attempted to counter, arguing for his client's rights and contributions to the marriage. However, the greed and malice behind Derek's actions were too apparent, the evidence against him damning. Finally, the judge spoke, her voice firm and authoritative. "After reviewing the evidence and considering the testimonies, it's clear to the court that Mr. Turner's actions were motivated by self-interest at the expense of his wife and her ailing mother." She continued, outlining her decision, which included the protection of my mother's estate from Derek's reach and a fair division of our assets that reflected our contributions to the marriage. Derek was to receive far less than he had anticipated, a direct consequence of his actions. As the judge pronounced the judgment, Derek's face went white, the reality of his defeat settling in. He had underestimated me, thinking he could bully me into submission. But standing there in the courthouse, victory at hand, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Derek attempted to protest, but it was over. The judge's decision was final. Outside the courthouse, he approached me, his expression a mix of anger and disbelief. "You'll regret this, Lillian. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the last of me," he hissed, his voice low and threatening. I met his gaze, my resolve unwavering. "No, Derek. It's you who will regret underestimating me. I've done nothing but protect myself and my mother from your greed. Go ahead and try whatever you want, but know this. I am no longer the person you can manipulate and control. This is the last you've seen of me." Turning away from him, I walked into the sunlight, a free woman at last. The battle was over, and though I knew Derek might never change, I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my mother's legacy. In the weeks following the court decision, I focused on rebuilding my life with my daughter, away from the shadow Derek had cast over us. My mother's health continued to decline, and I cherished every moment I could spend with her, knowing they were precious. One day, as I was returning from visiting my mother, I found Derek waiting outside my new apartment, a sight I had dreaded yet anticipated. His appearance was disheveled, a far cry from the confident man he once portrayed. "Lillian, we need to talk," he said, his voice lacking its former assertiveness. I stopped in my tracks, wary. "There's nothing left to discuss, Derek. You've made your intentions clear, and so have I." He shuffled uncomfortably, looking around before fixing his gaze on me. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. I was wrong, Lillian. I see that now. I was blinded by greed." Hearing the word greed come from his mouth felt surreal, almost as if he had finally come to terms with the root of his downfall. Yet I remained skeptical. "Realizations come a bit late, don't they?" I responded coolly. Derek took a step closer, desperation seeping into his tone. "Please, Lillian, I've lost everything. My job, my friends. I have nothing. I need help." His plea, though filled with apparent remorse, didn't stir the sympathy he likely hoped for. "You chose this path, Derek. You prioritized money over everything else, over us. You can't expect me to simply forgive and forget." "But I've changed, Lillian. I can prove it to you, to everyone. Just give me a chance," he implored, his eyes searching mine for a sign of forgiveness. It was then I realized the depth of Derek's destruction. He had been consumed by his greed, And now, stripped of his ambitions and schemes, he was left with nothing but regret. "Derek, it's too late for chances. You made your decisions, and now you must live with them," I said firmly, my heart hardening against the sight of the man who had once shared my life. He seemed to shrink before my eyes, the finality of my words hitting him. I understand. I'm sorry, Lillian. Truly I am," he murmured before turning and walking away, a broken man. As I watched him disappear, a mix of emotions washed over me. Pity for the man Derek had become, relief for the freedom I now had, and sadness for the love that had once been but was destroyed by greed and deceit. In the days that followed, rumors reached me of Derek's continued downfall. He tried to rebuild his life, but his reputation preceded him, a constant reminder of his actions. Eventually, he left town, seeking a fresh start elsewhere, but the damage was done. Derek's demise was a testament to the consequences of his choices, a stark warning of the destruction greed can bring. I turned my attention back to my life, to my daughter and my ailing mother, focusing on healing and moving forward. Derek's chapter in our lives was closed, a painful but necessary end to a story that had taken us through the darkest of times to emerge stronger, wiser, and free.